Global Conservation Corps presents the RHINO MAN podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of RHINO MAN the movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with my good friend Ruben De Kock. Ruben was first a soldier in the South African Defense Force, where he specialized in training equestrian and motorcycle skills, along with weapons handling. When he retired as a staff sergeant, he began training field rangers for the Bureau of Natural Resources in KwaZulu-Natal. There he met the legendary ranger trainer Martin Mthembu, who soon became Ruben's best friend and eventually partner in their own business, African Field Ranger Training Services. Together, along with Ruben's wife Marianne, they trained thousands of rangers across Africa, Asia, and Europe. Later, they sold AFRTS to the Southern African Wildlife College, and now Ruben works as a development manager at Lead Ranger. He's also one of the stars of our film, RHINO MAN. In this conversation, we take a trip into Ruben's storied past, plane crashes in the Congo, poacher encounters in the bush. We learn about his time in the military and when he first trained rangers at Ntinini under conservationist Nick Steele. We dive deep into his relationships with his friend Martin and his wife Marianne, and we explore Ruben's passion for everything rangers. He has truly dedicated his life to fighting for field rangers, making sure that they get the best skills and support they well deserve. So without further ado, let's jump into this epic conversation. All right, welcome to the show, Ruben. Really a pleasure to have you on the RHINO MAN podcast.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Good to see you and just good to be in contact again.
Absolutely. Yeah, excited to dive into more of your story and history and especially expertise around rangers and ranger training. I think it was 2018 when I first met you. It was our last shoot for RHINO MAN, which you had been involved with for some time with Matt prior to my coming into the project. But I think I remember it was a selection arrival day. It was when I first met you and the guys were getting ready to come in. And the thing you were always most adamant about was just making the rangers look good. And so I figured just starting out, maybe talk a little bit about where does this passion for rangers come from for you, and why do you care so much about rangers and supporting them?
Thanks, John. I think one of the most important things for me that stood out and working in conservation was that the rangers were almost not regarded in a lot of spaces. A lot of places where you got there and the rangers were simply not regarded. I remember getting into heated arguments with people about how rangers should be treated, how rangers should be equipped, how they should be looked after, trained, those types of things. And yet they are the front line. They're the first guys that deal with this onslaught on conservation. And I'm not talking about things like things that we can't deal with at that level, like Earth, the Earth getting warmer and global warming and those types of things. I was looking for the word for a while there. But I'm talking about the guys that deal with what is out there, what is in the front there. If you look at the rhino situation, if you look at the history of the rhino situations from 1960 up until 1980, I mean, 9.5 rhinos a day on average were getting killed. And the people that had to do the protection of those animals were the rangers in the front. If you look at the organizations that I worked for in KwaZulu-Natal, we were a very small conservation organization, the old Bureau of Natural Resources under Nick Steele and those guys. We were a really small group of people, and we were, I would almost say, integrated as a family, because we were so small, everybody knew everyone. And I quickly realized that some of the conservation organizations don't even look after rangers. And having been a soldier before for 10 years in the South African Defense Force, realized that it's the frontline guys, an army marches on its stomach, that type of thing. But for me, the rangers had to get proper training. They had to get proper equipment, proper support, essentially, for many, many years. And I think it's like this in any ranger organization. But for many years, rangers had no backing, no legal backing. If they took a fatal action against a poacher, there was no lawyer standing up for them in court. There was nobody saying, hey, we will look after you. And I think mostly in some of the private reserves, that started to change slightly. But when the rhino poaching really came to South Africa in 2008, and we were warned in 1992, Glenn Tatham warned us that there was going to be a serious onslaught on rhino populations in South Africa.
How did that prediction come about? I guess I've heard that before. You know, you guys were kind of getting ready, and even Anton talks about, you know, when he was being trained, everyone was saying this war is coming. What were the signs? Was this happening in parts north of South Africa and other parts of Southern Africa already?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was dropping like a curtain over Africa. By the time that Zimbabwe declared a shoot to kill, so-called shoot to kill policy in Zimbabwe, it was too late. They had already lost 99% of their rhinos. So it was going to happen because the market was not getting smaller. You know, rhino horn was getting more and more valuable, and it was going to happen because we had rhinos. We had thousands of rhinos. So it was going to happen. And in my view, the people that were going to have to deal with that one-on-one would be the rangers. So I've always been passionate about, ever since I got into conservation and was a field training officer, felt that the rangers had to be looked after the best. You know, you could have all of these things happening around in head offices and scientists and all of those things. And I think Jack Greer said it best, you know, scientists should be on tap, not on top. Because I think some people studied some of the species, they studied them to death, you know, that not doing anything about the counter-poaching situation that they needed to do at the time. If you think of the northern white rhino in the DRC, that war was lost for that northern white rhino. And I think it was lost because the counter-poaching units were activated too late. But that's my personal opinion. So rangers are frontline. And if you are out in the field and thousands upon thousands of people come to South Africa or go to big conservation areas in Africa, they travel for days on safari and enjoy themselves. They never ever see a ranger because the ranger is not supposed to be seen. He's away there somewhere in the bush. He's looking at the assets which are waddling about there and are they're the ones that are in danger. And this is not the only thing, not just the poaching threat against the rangers. If you look at malaria, it kills more people than anything else in Africa every year. If you look at dangerous game, floods, cold, heat, you can name it. The rangers stand in front of all of those things every single day of their working lives. Why not look after them? And that's why the ranger, to me, has always been the individual within conservation that we should be looking at, always.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Those guys really have to put up with a lot, and even just in terms of deployments, I mean, just because logistically you have to kind of keep these guys out there for a long time, so they're away from families for a long time, and there's just a lot they have to do to
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry, John, I must say, in defense of some of the organizations, they've woken up to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
They've woken up to the situation that a ranger needs legal representation if he has taken an action. They've woken up to the situation that rangers need psychological care after they've been involved in a shooting incident or a full-on armed contact. And some of those organizations have woken up to that, for which I'm very, very thankful. They're starting to look after them. But I can tell you something, in 1992, that didn't exist. You know, probably up until after 2008, that didn't exist in a lot of places. And I'm just thankful that people have started to realize and recognize that rangers have got the value that they have, because they are, in my view, the most valuable individuals out in the field. You know, a war is not fought by generals. A war is fought by people on the ground. And boots on the ground, that's where I've always seen myself. And that's why I've never said I'd be a specialist ranger trainer. I was a field ranger trainer. I took the guys from the street, put them through those selections, put them through the basics, and prepared them to face that first onslaught. And that onslaught could be weather, could be wild animals, could be poachers. But they had to survive that first onslaught. So I've always stuck with that and felt proud of being involved with Rangers at the basic level.
Yeah, there's so much I want to dive into with you around Rangers and even the rhino poaching crisis and kind of how you've seen it evolve over the years. But before we go into that, let's back up a little bit and dig into your past a bit. How did you get to where you are now? I know you have a bit of a military history. Maybe you can go into that. I don't know if you had a connection to conservation before or if that kind of came after. Maybe just tell a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are.
Well, yeah, I've never had a conservation background. I grew up in Pretoria, the fourth son out of five, and we had four almost like adoptive brothers that were always around. So we always saw ourselves as nine sons. But then always wanted to be a soldier, always wanted to go into the military. I wanted to be a non-commissioned officer so that I could deal with people because I love dealing with people. Ended up in the military. In those years, everybody, all white South Africans had to do national service. I pushed until I was permanently appointed. Ended up in the equestrian center, which was a really nice place to be. We worked with horses and motorcycles. So I literally spent, after my junior leadership training, I spent 3.5 years in the Angolan War, riding horses mostly, and then once or twice with motorcycles and operations, and then came back and then spent another 4 years roundabout working with Directorate Special Tasks, where we were training people outside of South Africa. And my speciality was training through interpretation. So standing with an interpreter next to me and training people, in this case, mostly motorcycle riding, together with the weapons that we were selling in those years to other countries, places like Sri Lanka and Turkey and other places. And loved the military, absolutely loved it because it's all I ever wanted to do. Met some of the most interesting people, worked in some of the most interesting places, really, really nice. Then in 1991, towards the end of 1991, we knew that the government in South Africa was going to be changed. And we knew that some of the specialist units would be hunted. They would not be very welcome. Directorate Special Task, in my view, one of them. And my then officer commanding said I must start looking for another job, which I had no clue what to do. I mean, I didn't think of ever in my life doing anything else but being in uniform and training people and being on a parade ground or whatever. However, he managed to find me a job because I simply wasn't looking, and he got me into conservation in KwaZulu-Natal, like as I said earlier, with the Bureau of Natural Resources, which was run by Nick Steele, an absolute legend. And I remember going there and realizing that just about everybody that I met up with had some ex-soldiers connection. There were guys that had been on tours, 2-3 tours in Vietnam. There had been guys that were in the Rhodesian War. There were guys that were ex-soldiers from South Africa, of course, ex-Kufut. We were all ex-soldiers, but Nick Steele, through his wisdom, immersed us all in this conservation field. And he said, listen, this is a different job. We don't need saluting and all that kind of stuff here. We need a different type of discipline that makes you survive in the field while you are looking after what is in the field and not necessarily being a soldier. So,
may I ask, what was Nick's background? Did he come from mostly conservation background?
Oh yeah, Nick Steele was extremely well connected in conservation. Worked with from the old days with Colonel Jack Vincent and the old Mfolozi. Worked with Dr. Ian Player. They were contemporaries. He was extremely well known to Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, who was then in charge of the KwaZulu-Natal self-governing areas, and they were actually friends. In fact, at Nick's memorial after he passed away, the Prince Buthelezi actually cried, which for a Zulu is not something that happens quickly. I remember him burying his face in a towel, talking about his friend. Mlamba, the hungry one, was his Zulu nickname. But yeah, so Nick Steele was a conservationist through and through. The one thing that counted a little bit in my favor, but also against me, was that Nick Steele was a horseman, and I came from an equestrian unit. So we constantly disagreed. He thought the Australian Stockman saddle was the best thing that you could have since sliced bread. And I said, no, it's a Rhodesian McClellan. And He favored a revolver, I favored a pistol, and so we just disagreed about everything, but in a very friendly way, because he was known to always take out. He had this dinky little notebook, you know, those spring notebooks that have got little spring in them. A dinky one. I'm talking really small, smaller than A6, that's for sure. And he would take that out and with a short pencil make notes, and you would pop up, or your comments would pop up in one of his books, you know, a year or two later. But he was just such a person that he would speak to you directly and he would listen to you directly. He was never one of those bosses that kind of like, you know, asked you, how are you doing? And then went on about what you should be doing. If Nick Steele came to your office, an example, if Nick Steele came to your office, you knew he had spent 2.5 hours or 3 hours with your Rangers already. Which means if he walked into your office and he said, Ruben, how's the hot water in the station? And you didn't have hot water for 4 days, you better not say to him, no, it's all fine, sir, because he knew the answer already. But I think there's also such an example of being a Rangers man, because he was a Rangers man. He was for the guys on the ground. In any case, I started in conservation. I literally left the military on the 28th of February 1992. And I started my first training course on the 3rd of March 1992 at Mthembu Field Training Center, which was in KwaZulu-Natal. And we trained all our Rangers ourselves. We went to the field to go and train them there. And then as we started to run out of budget, because conservation notoriously never has budget, we started training externally to our own units. So I started training some of the private reserves around us. And then started training national parks down in the Karoo National Park, because they were not allowed to be trained in Kruger National Park. And I was approached by Kruger National Park when they shut down their internal training units, Jack Greer and Brian Harris, those guys. When they shut those down because of the political connotations of having this internal unit and having their own staff being exposed to possible grievances and disciplinary actions, things like that. They approached me and asked me if I would train Kruger National Park Rangers. And I said, yeah, of course, no problem. All Rangers had to be trained. So in 1996, I started training Kruger National Park guys and trained them up until 2014. Trained the Kruger National Park guys. Went in there, got the selection sorted out together with a guy called Stephen Whitfield. We spoke about what selection should be, put the plan together on how we're going to do selection, and got HR involved rather than getting the conservation guys involved. The reason for that, HR is the guys that at the time were making the highest impact in these national parks, because they, you know, in the new South Africa, they had a lot of power. And if you could get HR to accept what you are doing, then you were A for away. So literally got HR to buy into the selection process, and then just went for it. And that worked extremely well. Kruger was elated with the results that they were getting, and it was a question of we kept on going back, until procurement, which was another becoming a very powerful unit within the establishment, started to say, yeah, but they can't just use one service provider. And I know that they got another service provider for one of the years. And we were just blessed enough that 8 months later, they called us and they said, please come and fix this kind of stuff. Because I don't think other organizations were as focused on the Rangers as we were. I think between myself, Martin, Marianne, we were focused on the Rangers. We were focused on the students. I'll never forget one of my trainers. One day I was having a discussion with them, telling them what I believe they should be doing on the day's training and things like that. And one of the trainers said, wow, by the way, you're going on, the students are more important than us. And I looked at this person and I said, they most definitely are. They are the most important people here today. Myself, you, everyone standing around in the circle at this moment in time, we're not important. These guys is the product that is going to have to face the front. And you can walk away from here after 6 weeks of training or whatever. These people are the ones staying here. They are the advertisement of your work for the rest of your life, you know. So it was really important that we made a success in Kruger, because the Kruger success kind of like filtered out
Mm-hmm.
to get us, first of all, into Mozambique under Andy Davies, who was also a brilliant boss. Get us into Mozambique, from Mozambique, get us into Ghana, from Ghana, get us into the DRC, into Kenya, into 23 different African
Mm-hmm.
countries, 9 Southeast Asian countries.
Just because the Kruger was such a respected park, is that kind of what
I,
helped?
I think in the marketing strategy, which we didn't have, how it was working is people were phoning Kruger and they were saying, who's training your guys? And they would say, it's African Field Ranger Training Services. And then they would call us. So I'm actually jumping ahead here now. So the 10 years spent with the Bureau of Natural Resources saw us circling out, starting to train other places, other people in private reserves, in some other national reserves, and some of the provincial parks and those. And after 10 years, we realized, because the deal with Nick Steele was that if we trained outside of the Bureau of Natural Resources, that we would then, that money which we earned there would go back into the training pool for the Bureau of Natural Resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that worked beautifully. Unfortunately, Nick got really sick and passed away. And when Nick passed away, we suddenly had a budget in the training unit that was bigger than our regional budget. And, you know, a bean counter got up and he said, this can't be. Why, he never said, but he basically took all the money. And he said, okay, this is for the region. And that was when Marianne and I were talking to each other. And I said, you know what, I feel a little bit betrayed, but somebody who passed away and can't defend you is not betraying you. But I felt betrayed by the organization. And that was when she came up with the idea and she said, do you think we could do this privately? And I started to investigate that capability or that possibility. In 1998 was the first time the South African Wildlife College asked me to go and train for them. Clive Boltney did. Also one of my opponents actually in the training field. He was a brilliant trainer, make no mistake. But he was getting jobs in Malawi when I was still pottering about in Mozambique. And I was asking him, how do you get these nice jobs? But anyway, we ended up, Clive asked me to come and train at the South African Wildlife College. And at the college, I started voicing this need from what I believe for us to start a private training company. And just starting to test the waters and ask the right people, the right questions. And it kind of like grew. And obviously at the end of 2000, that was exactly when what had happened was there was a lot of activity going on through what they called affirmative action. So in what happened in KwaZulu-Natal, and it was part of the political issues that were going on in the country and this new democracy that we had and everything else. But in this affirmative action, it seemed as if they removed all the most competent people first. All the people that could speak fluent Zulu were taken out because I think they were understanding too much of what was going on inside the organization. And then the people that were having the biggest successes. And there was a guy there by the name of Kulani Mkhize. Him and I started on the same day, believe it or not, in KwaZulu-Natal. We started at the same rank. We were senior nature conservators. And I phoned him and I said, Kulani, how's it going? And he said, no, it's all going well and everything else. And I asked him, I said, I hear some rumors going on, about people getting basically pushed out, what we call the golden handshake. And he said, yeah, you might be next. So be careful. And I said, but I'm essential services training, because I've always seen that as essential, of course. And he said, I'm warning you. And I said, what do I do? And he said, have you got leave? I said, yeah, I've got months of leave accumulated because we never took leave because we were working in all these beautiful places. And he said, take leave, start a company. And it's exactly what we did. I took 6 months leave, went out, came back for 3 months, resigned and left Mthembu Field Training Center on the 16th of December 2000. That was the day that we left.
What was that like? I mean, that's a pretty big leap to go out on your own. I mean, what were the emotions around that? What did you feel like you were ready?
if you have 6 children at school and most of them at hostel, and you got to pay for that, and you got 100 rand in the bank to start a business account, it's pretty much jumping out of a plane without a parachute on. It's a literal leap of faith we just said, you know what, we'll pray for work. God will give it to us. We'll just do the job, And we literally, yeah, it was literally stepping out into a situation that you did not know and had never been exposed to before. I've never been a businessman in my life before. I've never owned a company. But the company was started, African Field Ranger Training Service was started between myself and Brian Harris. When I left on the 16th of December 2000, I made Martin Mthembu a promise, and I said to him, listen, but the moment that I know we can make it with another instructor in this company, I'm coming to fetch you. And he said, that's great. I'll see you then. I said, okay, I'll see you then. And left. Brian could not train, but Brian could not go out and do training, anything like that, because he was full-time working for the Timbavati. He was their manager.
Yeah, that's how Anton kind of got into the Ranger business, was through Brian Harris, correct? I think he was there at the time.
Ingwavuma. Yeah. Brian's nickname is Ingwavuma. But anyway, that's how Anton got in as well. Anton got trained by us while Brian was still a member of African Field Ranger Training Services.
Mm-hmm.
But Brian, by his own admission, had to be a silent partner because he wasn't allowed to do any other business. And we went into this, started training, and I ended up just running all over the country and training people, mostly South African national parks down in the Karoo National Park, which was really great exposure, completely different terrain than what we had here in the Lowveld. And just starting training people in that. And I still had contacts in Mozambique, and I was using them to go and train there as well. And Brian had some contacts building up. And eventually Brian left South Africa for Tanzania. And once he had done, or just before he had done that, we felt that we could pull Martin in. So we drove down to KwaZulu-Natal to go and interview Martin. We were still pitching joining us at AFRTS, and he had already said yes. So Martin then joined us 2002, actually beginning of 2003, by which time Brian had left the country and went to Tanzania. Martin and I continued on until about 2005, when we realized that we were the two guys working our butts off, and we were the ones who had to generate the business and that. So eventually went to go for a meeting with Brian in Tanzania while we were training there in the Grumeti, and said to him, listen, we'd like to buy you out, which we did. So we bought him out of the company. So now Martin and I were alone members of the company, and Marianne obviously being our administrative backup. And AFRTS literally went from strength to strength. I mean, we were training everyone because still think and believe that we were training everyone because people realized that the rangers that we trained came out different to the guys that were just being chased around and shouted at. We worked with the philosophy of this thing a hell of a lot, while giving them very, very tough training, make no mistake. We worked with the philosophy of being a ranger, which was a big thing, at that time. So, and that was fueled by people like Nick Steele, like Andy Davies, like Drummond Densham, people that understood how people should be approached in that. And both Martin and myself, Martin being an ex-Special Forces soldier, or I think he went on selection for Special Forces when he broke his ankle, but also being an ex-soldier, myself being an ex-soldier, and that's how we built it up. And it was one thing after the other. We quickly realized that we couldn't just train the both of us in one spot at one time. Mm-hmm. That wasn't viable business. So we had to split up. So Martin ended up taking an example. Tanzania was the country that he favored to train in because he could speak Swahili, and Angola because he could speak Portuguese. So I would end up training in the DRC, not that I can speak French, but I ended up training in the DRC and Ghana and many of the other places where we went to. So that was the kind of development that we got going.
When did you guys connect with Southern African Wildlife College? I mean, it sounded like you did some training there to start with, but eventually it became kind of your home base, right?
Yeah, we trained with the first time I connected, as I said, with the Wildlife College was 1998 when I was invited there on contract. And then I trained on contract for them for quite a while. And I think the college came to realize that they, having established themselves to train reserve managers, they needed a field ranger training arm. And we ended up doing a lot of their field ranger training. So if they got field ranger training contracts coming in, they would get us to come and do it. Whether it was in Mozambique, whether it was a provincial park in South Africa, whatever. But eventually, there was a bit of dissatisfaction going on between myself and one of the first directors of the college, or one of the directors of the college. And when he left was when Teresa Sowry came in as the new director. And by this time, I had told the previous director that we would no longer train for them because they had a financial administrative system that was not to our benefit. It didn't help us to train for them. We were losing by training for them because that guy was a financial guy. He was very clever. As I said, I'm not a businessman. But as it turns out, Teresa and I had a discussion and we came to a really good agreement, which then almost made us like the permanent field ranger training arm of the college. So we were training for them a lot. We spent months of the year there. We're not outside of the country. We eventually started sending other trainers there that we had developed so that we could work outside the country. And eventually you get tired of traveling, and we ended up trying to do more work at the college while other guys went outside the country. And I think it was in February 2013, Teresa made a comment, jokingly so, that they had spent a lot of money on African Field Ranger training services that year or the previous year. And I made a joke. I said, well, why don't you buy us? Now, the idea of selling AFRTS actually came from Martin and myself sitting around the fire in Swaziland at Inyoniami Swaziland irrigation schemes where we trained. They were our longest existing customers. And we sat around the fire, and Martin and I discussed the fact that we had a company. We were training, running all over the world, but we weren't building up a pension. We weren't looking into the future for us, for our families, and so on and so forth. And we came to the conclusion we needed to sell this company. And we knew from the start selling it would mean that we would sell the company and that we would probably have to contract with the people selling it so as to carry over our contacts and so on and so forth. So, making a joke with Mrs. Sowry, in June 2013, we signed the papers. We had sold AFRTS to the South African Wildlife College. So we got a fairly large lump sum payment out. Martin and I distributed the monies, and we both started working for the college with a solid 5-year contract behind us. And that was in 2013, June. Martin passed away, unfortunately, as you know, 2nd of August 2014. In a tragic vehicle accident, 600 meters outside the gate of the college. But by this time, obviously, the family had been taken care of and that in terms of the way it was going. But that kind of like left me alone in terms of what we were doing, although Martin's contacts were mine, my contacts were his. So I still carried on with that and still supported and trained at the college. Marianne established the Field Ranger training base there. That was one of the points that came into the deal when we said that they could buy AFRTS. We said that they had to establish a Field Ranger training base for us because we felt that the conditions in the college were so good for students, televisions, computers, soft beds, those types of things. We needed a base, and that's the base that you came to in 2018. That was established by Marianne. She literally paced it with Richard Sowry, the local section ranger, and the fence went up according to their pacing. And we started training inside that base before there was a dug toilet there, because we knew we had to expose rangers to that type of situation. So, and then they established the base, and that base still going on, still going strong, I hope. And we were with the college. Suddenly, AFRTS was taken as an entity, the name was maintained, and it went into the college, but still as African Field Ranger Training Services, because the reputation of the company had grown to such an extent that people across Africa and Southeast Asia particularly were looking for us. Even up in Europe, in Georgia, and those places, people knew of African Field Ranger Training Services. So the machine kept on running. Basically, we just kept the motor running and kept it tuned as finely as we could, and we got the best instructors in that we could, and we continued training for the college.
And then you left in 2019, is that correct?
2019, I left the college after 6.5 years there. I got a job as a tiger reintroduction lead in Cambodia, of all places. Completely new world to me. But I think the preparation that I had in terms of training rangers, and as that escalated, as we started to train more and more bigger organizations. If you look at Tanzanian national parks, we trained them. Martin trained them. If you look at ICCN, the DRC, we trained them. We trained the Wildlife Division of Ghana. So we were training the national parks units of other countries. And we got quite adept at dealing with people at the ministerial level, in some cases at the presidential level, in some cases at the royal level, dealing with kings, dealing with people in those. And I think leaving for Cambodia, and I'll never forget it, when I went there for the interview, WWF flew me into Cambodia for the interview. And there was a guy there who later I've come to respect greatly, a man by the name of Stuart Chapman. And he said to me, "Have you ever dealt at ministerial level?" I said, "Yes, sir, I have, in different countries, different conditions." And he said to me, "And royalty?" And I said, "Yes, sir, African and European." But that was literally the advantage that AFRTS had given us, is this exposure that we had to the national level of conservation in different countries. Teresa and I traveled to Angola a couple of years ago after Martin had passed away in that. And we got to Angola, and believe it or not, at the ministerial level, Paula Francesca and the people there said to us, they were so sorry to hear about Martin. But that shows you, even on his own in Angola, that was the impact that he had made, and the impact that AFRTS made. Because we are very, very solid in advocating for rangers being looked after and rangers being cared for in a proper way, being equipped, being trained, being prepared for mentally. And I think they came to respect that. I think the people in those places came to respect the fact that we weren't there essentially for ourselves. We were there for the rangers. So yeah, Cambodia was a really interesting one. Loved it. Loved living in a city suddenly after many 27 years in the bush. It was wonderful to live in a city. It was wonderful to walk out of an apartment at 9:30 at night and buy an ice cream and just sit and look at the city lights. It was really great.
Phnom Penh, is that where you were?
Phnom Penh, yeah. I was based in Phnom Penh and did a lot of work in Mondulkiri and the Shreveport Wildlife Sanctuary. So really, a really interesting exposure and a really interesting deployment. Absolutely loved it. And then after a year in Phnom Penh, I think we got very exposed at the ministerial level. It's a dangerous country to work in when you work with politicians in that country. And I think I might have been a bit too honest with people in terms of what they were doing and what they should be doing. And basically, when I came back to South Africa for my annual leave, I got a call 5 days later saying that they couldn't continue with my next year's contract, which I was very happy with. Both Marianne and I prayed for getting out of Cambodia and not going back. It was a country that was absolutely beautiful to look at, fantastic to travel in and that. And yeah, we were quite happy to be back. And then now currently operating with Lead Ranger, which is an organization that runs first aid training, or actually at the higher level, I would almost call it combat medics. And we equip people not only with the knowledge, but also with the actual equipment that they keep with them that they can use to save ranger lives. So yeah, very, very exciting at the moment.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And I remember when that whole Cambodia thing ended, I think it almost coincided exactly with the pandemic as well, which is pretty crazy, if I remember correctly.
Exactly, yeah. And in fact, on the 21st of March 2020, I arrived home, and the 25th of March 2020, 26th of March 2020, South Africa went into a complete lockdown.
Yeah.
So I had just made it home. Yeah.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, I think I got there on the 16th of March, and then after that, international travelers, if you weren't South African, weren't allowed back in. So just snuck in under the radar. I remember sadly
we had a couple of calls.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, sadly, there was a bottle of whiskey, bourbon that got lost in Cambodia.
Can you believe it? And I thought, Yeah, because we had to pack up our place in Cambodia. We had to pack it up, via video phone with some friends of ours there. And sadly, yes, that bottle of whiskey never made it back. And I was still keeping it for when you were coming back, hopefully to Cambodia, so that we could have it.
Well, we'll bring
So I'm still collecting the covers,
yeah, the
what
little
do you call
tops
it?
there, the Blantons. Yeah, it's well, I'll bring another one later this year when we come down to screen the film. So make sure we
Please do.
make up for that. I feel like through kind of talking through your history and your work, you mentioned a couple of very important names that if this is someone's first time kind of tuning in to your story and to Rhino Man, may not know who they are. So maybe let's start out with Marianne. Who is Marianne and how is she important to this story?
Marianne is the better half of the two of us. She's lovingly known as the corporal. Marianne is my wife. We got married on the 11th November 1995 while I was in conservation at Mthembu. She brought with her two beautiful daughters who are now mine. When they are doing good stuff, then they're mine. Marley and Francie, and she completely took over my four children, Ruben, Jeanette, Yuri, and Antoinette, and we just formed this incredible bond and team. And she has been with me in Field Ranger training from 1995. She's the one who started, first of all, typing up some of the materials that we were using in those days, which were very, very basic stuff. We believed in 80% practical, 20% theoretical, so the manuals were really thin. And as the training system in South Africa changed, that needed to be upgraded and she's the one who actually ended up doing that. But on the other side, Marianne is also an ex-soldier, spent 4 years in the South African military, walked out as a two-liner corporal, hence the nickname, but also the connection to the fact that in all our field bases, she was the one that was doing the logistics. She was the one that was setting up the bases. She was the one that was doing all of these different things and developed this real protective shield around the ranges that we were trading. In fact, you should probably do a podcast with her.
Yeah, I'd love to actually. Yeah.
But she's the one who set up this real protective shell around our trainees every time we had them, and just became so part and parcel of the process. I cannot count the amount of nights that she would have spent around the fire with other rangers sitting around us, and she being the only woman there. When we were training, whether they were male, female rangers that we were training, she was there. She was always there, and kind of like accepted, that there was going to be a lot of things happening around ranger training and around the way that we approach things, and really managed to encapsulate that into our training materials to the extent that she was running massive projects. At the college, she was running projects, 120 people a year that we were training for an entire year, and she was running those projects. So yeah, an integral part of the success of African Field Ranger Training Services, in fact, one of the founding members, but then also an absolute integral part to the success that I've had in terms of training people. Eventually I can just sit back and say I'm the blunt instrument. She's the one who works it all out.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that she's greatly respected throughout everywhere where we have worked. People know about her, people know her. People still contact her many years after they've been trained by AFRTS, and they still recognize her contribution to that. In Kruger Park, she's of course the favorite. Section rangers love Marianne, and they don't like me that much because I sometimes don't get them the best rangers because I might pick number 7 off the list instead of number 2 or whatever. But Marianne, she can do no wrong.
I heard she's also a really good shot with a rifle as well, right?
I knew you were going to go there. But let me tell you why. Marianne, and when she was in the military, she was involved in national security point shooting competitions. So they would shoot against other state organizations like ESCOM Security Services, the military. She was in the military, of course, against the police and that. So in terms of pistol, shotgun, and rifle shooting, Marianne was in the top of her class. I think there were 3 females taking part in those competitions, and she was the top of them. So yes, she outshoots me at every single competition, and she is just, yeah, she's just an all-rounder when it comes to that type of thing. Extremely tough. She's a very, very dedicated individual. Yeah, love of my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. It was really special getting to see you both running that training course or the selection course in 2018, and the
Yeah.
passion both of you guys have for these rangers. I think from the outside, if you're not hearing the conversations behind the scenes, you guys might seem overly tough and on these guys, and
Oh yeah,
especially when they first show up, there's a lot of yelling and stuff just to kind of snap people in line. But really, I think it's come out a bit already, and we can talk about it more. It's you guys really care about the end result and
absolutely.
equipping these guys and gals for the field so that they're ready for anything.
Absolutely, and I think it's exactly like you're saying, that if you were behind the scenes, you were there. When you see us in front of the squad, in front of the people, talking to them, and you hear the way that we address issues, and we're very precise. If you put down your backpack, that's it, you're off selection. Not allowed to put down your backpack, things like that. People might get the impression that you don't give a hoot about them. But behind the scenes, and I can tell you sometimes long nights that you are lying awake hoping some guy pulls through because you've seen the potential in them. And that those discussions sometimes made up our entire day as to who we believed were the better, the best, and so on. And even during training, I think students often thought, oh, we don't give a hoot. No, but we do. And we look after those guys, and Marianne even more so. I mean, she kind of like she would end up being the champion of that specific course, because you're taking somebody on, and she would be exposed to the bigger picture, because I would come in not as the trainer but as the manager and have to address an issue, and she would say, before you address this issue, this and this and this and this has
Mm-hmm.
transpired.
Mm-hmm.
And really looking after them. And I think, a lot of, I mean, she's gotten beautifully handwritten letters from students that have said, you became my mother, and a strong but a fair mother. you know, you're very strict, but a fair mother, and we love you. So she's earned the kudos for sure.
Can you maybe tell a little story or something, or just what it's like to, be partners working in this industry and getting to see all these amazing places? I mean, I know you've got stories of even plane crashes, and I don't know if that was the DRC or, but it's just you guys have gone on quite an adventure through this whole process.
The DRC is a really interesting one, and that's probably one of the better stories. Although, like you say, there are many of them. But we were in the DRC, and I was training in a camp called Camp Nambira, which is about 2.5 k's away from where. Sorry, I was training in Bakaramba, which is 2.5 k's away from Camp Nambira, where we were staying,
Mm-hmm.
right next to a river. So, being in the Congo, everybody had their own AK-47, and Marianne had a proper set of gumboots. And I greeted her early in the morning, and I said, I'm on my way to the training. I'll see you perhaps around about lunchtime. And went for my run up all the way to the Bakaramba base, had my weapon with me, my training stuff, everything. There we go. And she stays behind, and she decides to do some washing in the river. And she was washing some of the clothing, keeping an eye on the crocs. Luckily, there was a part in front of our tent which is really shallow, so crocs couldn't go there without exposing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So she was watching this, and then a group of poachers happened by. And when she tells the story, she says she looked up and her AK was standing up against this tree, which is about 15 meters away. And she realized, I am in this ditch. If they see me now, I'm a target.
Yeah.
So she leopard crawled, kind of like went flat to the ground and leopard crawled away out of the ditch to get to an AK. She got the AK, and she was standing by the tree and thinking, okay, I'm not going to take them on. There's 7 of them, there's 1 of me. They went past into the long grass, turning away from Bakaramba. And she decided there and then, okay, she's going to take a walk up to Bakaramba. And she did. She arrived there, as it were, about 10 minutes before lunchtime. And when she joined before lunchtime, the Congolese guys were all going, how did you get here? Who brought you here? She said, no, I walked up here by myself. They said, but you weren't you scared? Because there was a lot of activity going on in Garamba at the time. Weren't you scared? And she said, no, I've got an AK with me. Why would I be scared? No. We were in this plane crash. So this is a really funny story. we crashed in a Cessna 206. Then we got a guy to come and extract us from the Congo. And this guy arrived also in a Cessna 206, exactly the same model plane that we had crashed in. And this was about a week and a half later, 10 days later. He arrived, but he was, I think, a Canadian French guy. And he had this accent, and he was saying to her, "Don't worry, little lady, I'll get you out of here," you know. And she was stiff as a board because we had crashed in a plane 10 days before, you know. And we got into the aircraft and took off in exactly the same direction we were taking off when we fell out the sky, basically. And as the plane turned, his water bottle rolled from the front seat to Marianne's feet, and he was looking around, and he said, "Has anyone seen my water bottle?" And she took this bottle and she thrust it at this guy, and she said, "Keep your fucking eyes on the road, man."
Oh man.
But yeah, no, I can tell you so many stories where she was involved in so many different situations. We were training guys in Kruger National Park, but they came from Ghana, and we found ourselves on the Letaba River, which is a beautiful big river, and we were posing for a photograph and everything. The photograph was taken. As the photograph was taken, we both got a very great respect for elephants. We love them at a distance. We've seen the damage they can do. As the photograph was taken, this herd of elephant approached the river, and Marianne calmly said, "I think that's enough photos for now because those elephants are on the way." But the Ghanaians' reaction was speed.
They just took off.
Marianne just took my hand and said, "Come then, let's walk away." And then we walked away. But yeah, no, there's so many stories. I mean, making pap, making porridge for a king, one of the Zulu kings, one of the Nkosi from the Zulu, and him mentioning, "I've never seen a white woman make pap like that." I can mention so many, out shooting some of the section rangers in the Kruger National Park, out shooting them, and I'm talking guys with egos the size of Empire State. There's Marianne out shooting. A student came up to me one day. You know, when you get to a certain time in the course when we do all this extra shooting exercises, it's kind of like you prepare the guys really well for making the right decision, so that because they've got to defend that decision in the court of law. So we were doing extra shooting exercises, and this guy came up to me and he said to me, "He would like to have a shooting competition against me." And I looked at him and I smiled. I said, "Oh man, you can shoot against my wife." You know? And he didn't know her. So he said, "Against your wife." Then I put money on it. I said, "How much?" He said, 1,000 rand. I said, "Okay, 1,000 rand sounds good to me." And he went off. I said to Marianne, I said, "This guy wants to have a shooting competition against you." And she said, "Yeah, sure, come." And they went up to the 100 meters and they both got their ammunition. They had the competition. She outshot him. I mean, his eyes were like bloody saucers. Okay, he came back to me and he said, "Whoa, your wife can shoot." I said, "But where's my 1,000 rand?" He said, "Oh, don't be like that."
Yeah, student has changed.
But yeah, no, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
I think it's an absolute blessing to have somebody like that you live with 24/7, and you've got to be so careful to split that work time and that personal time. Although that does kind of like flow into each other almost. You know, when you start to recognize each other's capabilities, each other's skills, and you start to recognize how people kind of like they come to trust the unit. Okay, Martin and I were a unit like that. Marianne and I were, but the three of us were also a unit. Martin was extremely protective over Marianne because he realized the exposure that she had out there in the field. And you become a unit. Marianne and I are a very, very solid unit. Yeah, there's no other way I can describe that.
For sure. And speaking of Martin, could you dive into his story a bit more and your guys' connection? Was it the first day working at Ntanini that you met Martin, or soon after?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is Martin Mthembu to you, and talk a little bit about his story.
Yeah, Martin is a enigma. That's the best. That's the best I can describe. It's still very much alive in our house in terms of the way we talk and the way we reminisce about him and the times that we all had together on that. I met Martin on the 2nd of March, 1992, when I arrived at Mthembu, and I was given a small wooden timber flex house to live in. And Martin was there coming to welcome me, but also coming to say to me that we were starting the course the next day and that I would be using him as an interpreter. To which I said, no problem. And we started together, but very quickly realized Martin was not just an interpreter. I think on the 3rd day of the course, because of his military background, I asked him to take some of the foot drill exercises on the parade ground, which he did. And I just realized this guy is way above being an interpreter. And I started talking to Patrick Deavy, who was my direct officer commanding at the time. And I said to him, this guy must be one of the better trainers here. And it worked out that he became the best trainer in my mind in terms of what we were doing. But well known throughout Zululand, well loved throughout Zululand, and then we started working outside of the country, Mozambique first, after a couple of years. But by this time we had actually settled into a very comfortable partnership in terms of training. We got to a point where we knew what each other were going to say and were thinking, and it's kind of like a marriage of trainers where we really got to understand each other. And one of the principles which Martin brought to the table was he said, we're training all of these guys, but we should from time to time also be operationally active so that we could still keep in touch with operations, understand that. So which I thought was really forward thinking and which I subscribed to immediately. And I got Nick Steele to allow us to actually go and do operations, which we did. Martin and I had one at Lake Zulonde, which is up at Cozy Bay, the very northern part of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, where we were just observing, and we knew that there was a military unit from Mozambique that was crossing the border. There was no physical fence. They were crossing the border, taking water at Lake Zulonde, and what we wanted to do was observe these guys. And we got placed there by a guy called Ian Thompson, who was then kind of like the head of intelligence for KwaZulu or for the Bureau of Natural Resources. And we went there, fully planned up, kitted out to do 10 days on our own 2-man team and that. And we were very successful up until about day 4, when Martin came back from the very Lake Zulonde we were observing. And he was anti-tracking all the time. And he got to me and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Baba," which in Zulu is like, "Father, we've got trouble." I said, "How much trouble?" He said, 10 of them. I said, "Where?" I said, "Where?" And he said, "Look." And as I looked, this line, the sweep line, was coming up from the lake on the South African side. Now, we were well within our legal right to actually take these guys on and deal with them. But it's not a decision as a conservationist that you feel comfortable making. As a soldier, we probably would have. And I communicated to our base and I said, "Listen, we're about to be detected. Do we take them on? Do we run?" And the guy said, "Run." And we ran about 9 or 10 Ks over that beach sand, over dunes and in between the bushes, anti-tracking the first 600 meters,
Jeez.
which is very difficult in those conditions, anti-tracking all the way to the house at Cozy Bay, where we knew these guys would not come to because that was too well known.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience made me realize the technical capabilities that Martin had. And he must have realized that I was also quite willing to stand and fight, but also realized that there's a responsibility. Mm-hmm. And the more we worked together, the more we got opportunity to get to know each other, sit around the fire, have the difficult talks. When we got a new government in 1994, Martin and I had a big discussion about it. And there were several jokes flying around. South Africans' way of dealing with issues is to make a very quick joke about it. Even if it's a tragedy, people make a joke about it, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know. Psychologists will tell you better. But we were sitting around and we were talking about this. And it got to be quite a heated argument because I was talking about this whole affirmative action situation and all the best people being sent away. And we were having quite a heated argument about it. Martin was agreeing with me, but then in certain cases not agreeing with me. I was not agreeing with him, in certain cases agreeing with him. And eventually, Martin said something that stayed with me for a very long time. He said, just remember something. You've never been black in South Africa. And I looked at him and I said, touche. That's very true. I've never been. I didn't grow up in a house where racism was perpetuated. I felt the South African Defence Force was the best equalizer in terms of the racial issue in South Africa, because all you had was a rank. If you had a rank, that was it. Nobody cared about your skin color. People cared about your physical skill, capabilities, and the rank that you wore. And we both, as soldiers, recognized that. So our friendship grew tighter or better because of the fact that we could disagree with each other, the fact that we could discuss these things, and that we could go into some of the serious issues of the day and familial issues and all kinds of things. I mean, my children played with these children. In fact, my younger son, Yuri, and his son, Kulagani, became best friends while they were little guys running around the bush, just with strings around their stomachs, no other clothing. Steal my .22 and go and shoot at a tin can in the bush and get caught and get the hiding of their lives. And then, knowing doesn't help. If I gave them the hiding, doesn't help. I go to Martin, I'm going to get the same hiding. So we became really attuned to each other. We did an operation while there was pressure on Umfolozi after the amalgamation of KZN. So the Natal Provincial Administration, NPA, the Bureau of Natural Resources, and the then Natal Parks Board amalgamated. And when they amalgamated, there was a lot of pressure on Umfolozi. And we offered services to go and operate in this area, also to keep ourselves current. And we did an operation where we would spend a week 50 meters away from each other, never sleep close to each other, never speak a word to each other, but knew exactly what the other was thinking. And I'll never forget, we realized that this particular poacher was tracking rhino by going to the middens that they were leaving. Rhinos leave these middens. And we approached one of these middens. We started moving at about 2:30 in the morning so that we could really move slowly and get into position. And we got into position just as first lights, just as dawn started, really, but first light, really. And I was about to go down behind this bush, and I looked over at Martin, and he looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw he was saying something to me. He looked at me, and he literally pointed as if he was pointing over something. And before, with my creaking knees, I was going down in that position. I kind of looked over the bush, and the poacher was sitting there with his rifle.
Wow.
And we had managed to move up so quietly that this guy didn't pick us up. He must have been asleep or something, I don't know. But all I did was I just took the rifle, touched on the back of his head, and I grabbed his collar, and I said, Hima, which is stop. And he just dropped his AK forward, and he just sat there, and he shut himself, literally. And Martin came walking across, and he said, hey, Wana, I didn't think I was going to get my message across. I looked at him and I said, you didn't even have to say that. Just by looking at me, I would know that you would have thought you would not get your message across. But that's how well we knew each other. And we got to the point where they started talking of us about the twins. So I would arrive in Arusha, Keith Roberts would walk up and go like, hey, Ruben, hey, great to see you. I was hoping to see Martin. Or I would get into Kruger Park and they would say to me, where's Martin? Or Martin would get into Kruger Park and they would say to him, where's Ruben? And we were kind of always had this connection. And that was very, very special. But to have somebody that you can trust implicitly, have somebody that you can call at 3:00 in the morning, knowing that he will get in his car and drive 1,000 k's to come and sort you out if you had trouble, from both our sides. I mean, him being part of the business, it was a very dark time that they went through when he took over the family. So he was the family head in the Zulu culture. And they poisoned him. His great aunt poisoned him. And he disappeared for 14 days. And I couldn't get a hold of him. And eventually, trying everything and through everyone, got a hold of one of his sons. And I said to them, listen, I need to speak to your father. We're running a business here. And they said, well, I'm going to tell my father. I can't tell you where he is or why he is there. And that's in a great way respect that they have. And any case, and when I finally got to speak to him, he said to me, hey, what? You won't believe it. I was poisoned by one of my own. And I said, Martin, what do I need to do? How do I help you out of this? And he said, get the fuck out of the country. Get us a job in Tanzania or in Malawi or wherever, And I did that. Yeah, we kind of like, we met each other midway. Wednesday, I was on my way to Mapungubwe, one of the national parks in South Africa, to go and do a protected area security operations planning course on the Wednesday. The Tuesday night, I had a dream. At 3:00 in the morning, I was living in a tent. We lived in a tent, Marianne and I, for about 16 months at the Son of Wildlife College. And I literally stepped out the tent, stood under the stars, and spoke out blessings and prayers over Martin and his family, because that was the message I got when I woke up at 3:00 in the morning. So the Wednesday morning, I saw him and I said to him, listen, but this happened last night. And I got this message to speak blessings over you and your family and everyone. And he said, because there's something coming. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, I had that vehicle accident in Acorn Hook. He was driving and he stopped at a traffic light, and a vehicle hit him from behind. So he got out quite angry and he saw that it was a hearse. And the driver of the hearse got out and he was very apologetic. And Martin just said to him, look, go on and do your job, because there was a coffin in the back of the hearse. He said, go on and do your job. Please, let's just forget this. He said that was the first one. The second one was somebody in his family had phoned him and said, Martin, please protect yourself. I believe harm is coming your way. And the third one was one of the guys, one of the junior trainers at the time, literally was working with a 45 handgun, pulled off a shot, accidental discharge, which went 20 centimeters over Martin's head. Interesting that he looked up and he looked at this guy and he said, what are you doing? Quite calmly. But anyway, he said, I had those 3 warnings. And I said, well, Martin, I believe then that the message I got last night was to just bless you and your family in terms of what the situation is. And I left on that Wednesday, went to Mapungubwe, traveled from Mapungubwe on the Saturday to Johannesburg for the Game Rangers Association meeting, traveled back home, got the call that afternoon Martin had been in a vehicle accident and that he had passed away. It literally broke my world in two. I actually asked the guy calling me, who's a very mature Robbie Green. I can't remember if you've met him.
I don't know if I've met him now.
I actually asked him, Robbie, please just go back and double check. I don't think Martin could be dead. He said, I promise you, he did not make it. And that was just, that opened, John, a new picture of Martin Mthembu, because suddenly I was getting telephone calls from people that I did not even know knew Martin. Royalty, millionaires, billionaires. People were connecting with me in various different ways and saying they are so sorry for the loss to conservation, to us personally, myself, Marianne. It was just a terrible, I will never forget the date, 2nd of August, 2014. I'll never forget that. My 50th birthday, which was the next Saturday, I stood next to his grave on the day of my 50th birthday. And his birthday is on the 16th, of August, born in 1968. And yeah, it's the impact an individual makes. I've always said, when you go, you can't take any of your physical belongings with you. Nothing goes with you. The only thing you leave behind is the people that you have touched, the people that you have influenced. And I can tell you something, Martin Mthembu influenced thousands of people. And I hope that the RHINO Man movie influences millions. I hope that they recognize the sacrifice, the commitment, the complete passion with which somebody like Martin Mthembu does his job, with which somebody like Martin did his job. I really thank you guys. I mean, just for that alone, putting him up front there was absolutely fantastic to me.
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you for sharing that. We definitely, and you haven't even seen the updated version of the film, but honoring Martin is such a huge part of this film, and really, like, RHINO Man, I feel like is, Martin. He's the original Rhino Man, and just I think especially for people that don't know a lot about South Africa's history, I think showing that relationship between you and him is really important because it wasn't very common, I don't think, at least for a lot of big Afrikaans guys and a lot of big Zulu guys to be such close friends and partners as you two were during that time. And maybe you can talk just a little bit more to that and kind of the importance of that relationship. I know you talked a little bit about the conversations you guys had, but how unlikely is that kind of partnership at that time, and how important is it to see that, you know, these relationships can happen and form?
You're right, John. I don't think a lot of white people had this type of relationship with black people. I think at the time there was still a lot of people that were caught up in the old regime and the old way of thinking, and that were not happy with the transition to a democracy. We in Tanini, which is where the field training center was, is very close to a town called Vryheid, freedom, what the name means in Afrikaans. And the number plate for Vryheid is NV, and the Zulus used to call it no visit, because the town was well known for characters that would come in and act in such a way that they were clearly racist and did not like black people and so on and so forth. So yes, I think the relationship we had were extremely unique. I know that a lot of farmers in the area and a lot of people that were not only in agriculture, but even in the small business, a small town like Babananga, which is literally a one-horse town, people had very close relationships with their people working for them. They were all family. Everybody spoke Zulu. This is the nice thing about KwaZulu-Natal. If you can speak Afrikaans, English, Zulu, or German, you sort it. You can go any place and you'd be sorted out. And I think if I take the amount of times that Martin and I drove into town, into Vryheid, and would step out at a shop and go together into Edgar's or whatever shop was there, and the looks that you would get in that. And then when you speak to each other, either in Zulu or in English, and they realize that there's a respect between each other, people quickly realize that don't try to take these on. I remember standing back to back, first of all, in the Vryheid Hotel. We came back from a job we did in Mozambique. And I said to him, before we drive back to Tanini, let's stop in at the hotel and have a beer. Now, the hotel was just at that time, well, a year and a half, 2 years before, had been desegregated. So there was no longer a drinking spot for black and a drinking spot for white people. So we went into the bar and I ordered 2 beers. And this one guy got up and he said to me, "What are you doing here with this muntu?" Muntu being man, but specifically in this case, almost like a degrading sense towards a black man. And I looked at him and I said to him in Zulu, "He's not just a muntu. This man is a man, you know." And this guy said, "Do you want to step outside?" I said, "What for? I'll just break your face in here." And we had a back-to-back fight in this pub with a couple of guys. Not 18 months after that, we had a back-to-back fight in a black shebeen at Port Durnford, because we went for a beer on a Saturday evening. And the Zulu guy said to Martin, "What are you doing here with this mlungu?" Mlungu being a derogatory term for white. And Martin said, "It's not just a mlungu," and we stood back to back. So I think that relationship was very, very important. But in the conservation training field, people quickly realized, don't question Martin in front of me unless you got your grounds right. And Martin was not to be questioned about me unless people got their grounds right. And we quickly realized the one way to deal with those issues was to say, we train rangers, whether they are white, black, male, female, it didn't matter. We train rangers, that's it. And we saw ourselves as ranger trainers. And if people said to us, "But you guys are conservationists," we would say, "No, we're law enforcement trainers for conservation. Yes, we love conservation. We support the cause. And this is the way that we do it." So yes, I think we had a very unique relationship, a relationship that allowed for us to be able to deal with each other in trust. And for me to be able to say to Martin, "Listen, but I need you to go and do this or this or this," and he would go and do it. And for him to be able to give me a call and say, "Listen, but this has happened. I'm not going to get there. Can you do this and this and this and speak to so and so? And we would understand exactly where we're coming from. And the people that tried to perpetuate that line between white and black between us just always lost and eventually gave up, which I found really refreshing, because for me the problem of race was in their minds, not in ours. And yeah, that was a big bonus point for me with dealing and working with living with Martin.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And kind of moving more into the Rangers and the training side of it. How's the training evolved for you over the years from when you first kind of got into it to AFRTS and what you guys developed? Was there kind of an evolution in that process?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when we started Ranger training, in fact, that very first course in March in KwaZulu-Natal was very, very focused on the paramilitary. It was focused on weapon handling. Like I said, 80% practical, 20% theoretical. We kind of like took the guys into the classroom, gave them an introduction as to what Rangers were doing, and within 3 days we were out in the field. And then we were on the shooting range. You know, we lived on the shooting range, and then we went there, and then we went there. Very paramilitary. And Nick Steele was the man who came around, spent time with myself and Marianne around the fire one night. Actually, it's before Marianne was there, I lie. Can't remember who was with me. But we were sitting around the fire, and Nick Steele said, "Ruben, do you take time to teach these guys why they conserve?" And I was like, "No, sir." And he said, "You should really consider that." Nick Steele had a way of saying, "Please consider this," by actually saying, "Do this."
Yeah.
So, and he's not a big guy. He wasn't an aggressive guy. Just had a way of doing it. A magnificent leader. But anyway, and that was when we started talking about how do we make that all come together? Because yes, we could talk about law and law enforcement, but why? Why are we enforcing the law? And then there was a guy called Manfred Mthembu. And Manfred Mthembu was a conservationist. He came into conservation in the Bureau as a ranger, worked his way up to sergeant level, but he was a conservationist, understood the bush, understood the names of trees, animals, tracks, the whole thing. And pulled him in and said to him, "Are you going to be our conservation trainer?" And he said, "Absolutely." And he was brilliant. And him, together with Martin, then started teaching people the conservation ethic of things. Then came something which was pretty big in South Africa, where Nick Steele literally offered 25% of the income that came out of Mthembu, Tembe, Elephant Park, Cozy Bay to the local community. And people were going like, "What? What's going on here?" And in my view, and I don't know, I'm not saying this from having researched it, but in my view, I think Nick Steele was probably one of the first guys that took a step towards saying, listen, communities are actually the most important part. So we went from pure paramilitary training and training styles. We went to starting to get the training to involve the conservation issue, to involve ethics, to involve how do people handle their finances, because many of them would be without a job for many years before they get a job as a ranger. Suddenly they get a salary of 3.5 or 4,000 rand, which isn't much. And once they get that salary, boom, they wouldn't know how to handle it. So we started involving all of those issues. Marianne was instrumental in this in the later years, where she put together the program matter in such a way that the people could walk out of that training more all-rounded. So if you look at when AIDS, as an example, HIV/AIDS became a massive thing in South Africa, we included that in the training, and legally we had to include that in the training, but we included it in such a way that a lot of guys are just talking about AIDS is transferred by sexual action or whatever. We were saying, listen, if you're out in the field and you happen to be shooting a poacher, or a poacher runs away and he falls and he has got a gash on his cheek, be careful of the blood because HIV transferred. So yes, it has evolved quite a lot. I think the trick was to find the balance between preparing the guys and girls for the capability to survive that first contact, physically survive that, but also to be able in their own lives grow as individuals. I'm proud to say that some of the guys trained by Martin and myself are today section rangers in the Kruger National Park. Some of them are reserve managers. I just now, our organization, Lead Ranger, it's trained people in Ghana. And one of the guys I trained in 2004 is now the head of operations for the Wildlife Division of Ghana. And the lady there, Mary Balcorno, is actually the head of human resources. So people grow when you train them in a way where you say to them, you should grow. And I'm very proud of that. So yes, the evolvement of training, as pertaining to your question, the evolvement of training definitely took place. A lot of people will tell you, yeah, it got softer. It didn't get softer. It just put more pressure on the individual to understand his or her position in life. And that pressure had to be balanced between what they're going to need to do physically out in the field and what they need to be mentally when they are amongst their own or amongst their peers or amongst people that could be criminals.
Yeah. Yeah. And in 2020, during the pandemic, we covered another selection, which Alton ran, who was working with you when we were there in 2018. And I think that was something I was impressed by because in 2020, I actually saw the whole 6-week course. And yeah, you were talking about finances and things like that. So I was like, oh, wow, this is like it's a pretty well-rounded training program that educates people on more than just, like you said, the paramilitary side. And even like the conservation, they did transects and identified leaves and animals and all kinds of things like that. So they really got more in touch with what they're actually protecting. Yeah, maybe it's sort of a question that's come up around some of this stuff too is, I've seen a lot of pushback against green militarization and militarizing these rangers. And I feel like, I think there's probably people on that side that are pointing out actual things that need work and maybe looking at this as a more holistic process. But I also fear that, some people that don't know the complexity of a lot of these issues, and it's different for rangers in different parts of the world too, depending on what their job. There's so many jobs that rangers can do and do. But I was just curious what your thoughts were on people saying that, we're militarizing these rangers and conservation and that, there are negative side effects to that. But at the same time, you can't put these guys out there without any training and there's actual people shooting at them. So, what's this kind of medium?
John, I think when people started getting onto this wagon about green militarization was actually during a time when some of the other theaters of war in the world was closing. Iraq was closing, Afghanistan was closing, so many theaters of war were closing. And you had all these extreme specialists that were trying to come into Africa with their war experience and say, we can come and sort out your poaching problem. And obviously, a lot of those guys were backed by serious money. And a lot of conservation bodies in the beginning took these guys up on what they were going to come and do. And what happened was you had these ex-Navy SEALs, British SAS, you had all of these specialist soldiers coming into this continent, training guys in stuff that they never left behind. So they would train them in the latest combat medic situation, but not leave them a kit. They would train them in this weapon, but never leave the weapon. They would, and they would go like, yeah, you got to go out there and kill these guys. That's literally what was happening. I mean, we had organizations contact the Game Rangers Association of Africa, going like, well, we can supply you with spy planes, we can supply you with little bird helicopters with machine guns on them. No idea what was happening in conservation in Africa. Unfortunately, another group of people latched onto this. People that have been in Africa all their lives, have seen the conservation areas, have seen the way that people have policed those conservation areas. Remember, there's a law. Every single country in the world has got a conservation law. Why do they have it? Because we as humans abused nature to the point where nature's got to be protected by or protected against humans. And if you go back in the history of conservation, and you can go very far back, you will find that conservation areas, animals, areas, wetlands, rivers, those places that were enclosed in these protected areas have always been protected by people that were armed. 100 years ago, they were armed with not sticks and spears. 50 years or 80 years ago, it started to become 303 rifles and whatever detritus was thrown out of the Second World War, though some of that weaponry made its way to conservation, because in those days the main threat was the animals that they were protecting. In the Natal case, as an example, there were so many elephants, so many lions, so many dangerous games that you couldn't allow somebody to walk around there without a rifle. Farmers walked around with rifles. Everyone walked around with rifles, not to go and shoot other people, but literally to protect themselves against the wildlife that was running free in the area. And these conservation areas have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until they are now fenced entities in the South African condition. Further north in Africa, there's no other fence reserve except for Shire Hills in Ghana, which I know about. The rest has not got a fence around. And over time in history, the protection of natural resources has taken place by people that were armed to do so. The firearms have started to change because suddenly the elephant wasn't the main threat. I mean, they were killing 60 elephants a day in East Africa. In Garamba, they would kill 60 elephants in one morning using military gear to do that. How do you send a ranger to go and take on that kind of slaughter without that person being armed? But a lot of people went and said, yeah, but why does a ranger have to be in a uniform? Well, it's easier to buy 200 sets of camouflage uniform and put somebody in the bush where the camouflage helps them to survive than what it is to say to them, okay, guys, come to work in whatever you want to wear. And if 1/3 of the guys pitch up with white shirts, which happens to be a natural warning sign for animals, they're going to get attacked by lions, or they're going to get stormed by buffaloes, or whatever. So people started saying, do away with this uniform. Do away with this militarization, do away with yes sir, no sir, 10 back, full sir type of situation. But what they forgot in the African condition is that they were dealing with, in some cases, just in KwaZulu-Natal, at the time that I was there were 3,500 rangers, armed, uniformed, trained. Those people had to be disciplined. And there was one particular example where myself and Andy Davies had to deal with a standoff between like almost 600 rangers, all fully armed and trained, against about 90 policemen in Ulundi, where Andy Davies stepped forward in between these two groups, and he turned around, he said to the police, wait. He turned around, he looked at the rangers and said, lay your arms down. And because they were well trained, they laid their arms down. There would have been a bloodbath that day between two law enforcement agencies because of some political upheaval. So how can you have a group of people that are uniformed, that are armed, and not have discipline with them? How do you demilitarize that? What is the best disciplinary system the world has ever given us? Military. Why? Because people had to be controllable with the condition in which they were. So if you go back into Roman times, the Roman army was seen as one of the best disciplined armies in the world. Not only because they stepped forward when their centurions told them to, but because they could be commanded to deploy or retract their weapons whenever it was needed. And that is the kind of thing that you need. I think the demilitarization argument was seized upon by people that saw all of these specialists coming out of these war zones, and they said, wow, if we can stop them, maybe we can stop this as well. Well, I can tell you something. If Kruger Park or Umfolozi or Garamba or Morley National Park in Ghana was patrolled by people with no firearms, only the criminals would have the firearms, and we wouldn't have rangers there. So that's my view on it. I say this, train people in such a fashion that they can survive the armed contact, but train them to have compassion for the communities around them and to include those communities, even if their governments won't. I'm lucky in South Africa, governments have started including communities. Communities now own the northern part of the Kruger National Park by land restitution. There are many other private reserves that have opened themselves up to the communities around them. And I can tell you something, poaching has gone down, animal numbers has gone up. But it's when that dedicated poacher arrives that wants that rhino horn that he can sell and buy himself a BMW 2016 model, it's when that guy arrives that either community or rangers get hurt, because that guy doesn't arrive with a pencil and pen and paper. He arrives with something that can kill a rhino and a blade that can hack the horn off. And that is when you'll need your ranger to put on that hard face of law enforcement. The rest of the time, he can be a good communicator and a good educator. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've appreciated about your training and the wildlife college's training is that more holistic approach to what a ranger has to deal with out there. Not just the poacher, but communities and their own life. And there's discipline. I think you said be able to control these guys in kind of in a more of a military fashion. But I think that can, I guess, be taken wrong in some contexts. But I think even more the discipline. It's interesting, and I'd like you to talk about this too. Just seeing that shift in young students as they're going through selection and the training, when they're starting to apply this discipline in like more a self-discipline way. And I feel like there's a shift you kind of see in a lot of these students that like, oh wow, I can do a lot more than I ever imagined I could. And I feel like maybe that's something that attracts you to this work as well. But from your perspective, can you talk about that change you see in students as you're training them?
John, before I do, I just want to put another feather into the corporal's cap, because the program that you saw in 2018 with Alton, or when you were there with Alton, is the corporal's program. It's the program that the corporal got accredited in that. And at the time, we took the best possible subjects and put them together. In fact, the government subjects that was suggested was not enough to our liking, and we added operating a team to it, which the corporal did. And that's Marianne's work that you see there. So I just want to put that feather into a cap. The change in a person when they go through a selection. Anybody listening to this podcast that have been through a selection or have perhaps been exposed and seen it and have it explained to them like yourself had that, will realize that people come into that selection pretty much grieved. They walk in there not knowing what is going to happen next, not knowing how it's going to happen, not knowing what it's going to take in terms of exertion on their bodies and the way that they are, or the way that they should be. So when they go through that process and they realize after day 2, their bodies are sore, their feet are sore, and they realize after day 2, wait a minute, I'm still here, I'm still strong, I'm still going for it. They seem to push the ceiling that they've set themselves. They push that ceiling a little bit higher. And every day that they continue after that, they push the ceiling higher until they make the physical part of selection. Then they are interviewed, and in that interview, they get told, we saw this and this of you. Can you do this? Can you work in a team? Can you take care of your buddy if he or she has fallen? Can you do so and so? And they quickly realize there's more to this than just that physical exertion that they've just been through. And then they start to build up. But you can literally see it in their eyes. It's a determination that comes up. It's a competition against self that is being won every single day. I did not think I could do this, now I can. I did not think I could do this, now I can. And so they continue on. That change needs to be fairly complete. Unfortunately, these days, we sit with a lot of young people that come in and have a particular expectation that they should not be disciplined, that they should not, or they do not need discipline, until you start to expose them to the factors that requires discipline. Survival is one of them. And survival could, in the condition of a field ranger, be many things. Survival against wild animals, survival against weather, survival against poachers, survival within your organization by towing the line, so to speak. All of those things entail discipline. And once they start to realize, wait a minute, the little brat I've been at home to my parents is not whom I should be. I should actually be somebody that looks after my own body, my own hygiene, the hygiene of the area around me, which means if I go home, I better help my mum clean the dishes and make sure the kitchen is clean. And those types of things. I've had parents call me and say, I don't know who you sent back, but keep whoever is there, because the person you sent back is not my son or my daughter, but man, they can clean, or they are disciplined. And that is it's almost like it's a doorstep. They have to step through that door themselves, because if they don't step through that door themselves, they never display the discipline required of a field ranger, a person that has to respect nature around them, respect people above them, be able to report to those people, and be able to do so in a coherent fashion. So, yes, that flip over has always been fantastic for me to see. And even on the negative side, I had a guy that was doing a selection, came first on selection, came first on the course, didn't recommend him to be a field ranger. He was a very arrogant individual, very much on his own, not a team worker. And I thought after selection that the training would change him. And it didn't. Just one of those real strong personalities that one should respect, but also apply in the correct fashion. So he was not to be applied as a field ranger. This guy was livid. He was screaming in my face. I'll never forget it, right in front of my nose, screaming at me, I'm a racist and I victimize him and whatever and whatever and whatever. And in a calm voice, I said to him, Kenneth, if I appoint you as a field ranger, you're going to either be dead in the next year or you're going to cause the death of someone else in the next year. I'm not talking about a poacher, I'm talking about your buddies, okay? And he was livid. This guy phoned me 10 years later, John, 9:30 at night. He said, sir, it's Kenneth. I said, whoa, I know a lot of Kenneths. Is it Kenneth Mthembu, Kenneth Mashego? He said, no, it's Mashego. And I said to him, whoa, Mashego, I remember you. Are you still angry at me? And he said, no, sir. I'm now the translator in the court in Polokwane. I'm a translator in court. I'm studying my LLB, which is a lawyer's qualification in South Africa. And every single day, I see myself 10 years ago standing in the dock, arrogant, telling the judge, who are you? Telling people, I am me. Nobody can touch me. I'm invincible. I see it. And you were right, Mr. De Kock. If I was a ranger, I probably would have been dead by now, and I probably would have caused the death of other people. I call it that moment of clarity. That moment of clarity comes for different people at different periods of time. I had the privilege of working with a guy called Adam Olivas, who is an ex-Navy SEAL. And I have the greatest respect for this man, because as you meet him, as you work with him, as you go around getting to know him better, he stays exactly the same. But the person he stays always pays homage to the person he became through all of his training up until the point of stepping away or stepping out of the US Navy SEALs. I mean, this guy has got my eternal respect, because Adam was always the same. He was never somebody to come and say, listen, I know better than you do. He would come and say, I see you're doing this. I would do this. It's one thing I was trained. Obviously, you were trained as well. And he would look at the two and pick the best one, which 9 out of 10 times in certain conditions was his way. The 1 or 2 times that he accepted mine was something that he said, this is because I've never worked in this part of Africa. But here's a guy that had all the reason to be arrogant, all the reason to be out there and, I did it all. And he didn't, ever. And that, to me, that humility is what you see in rangers when they become truly successful. And I can mention people like Henry Mazangani, the ranger that we trained and survived his first contact within 4 weeks of being trained, and then exposed an entire group of rhino poachers within 6 months of being trained. Somebody that is, they humble people. And I can just hope that the influence that the training had on them, the influence that selections had on them, that personal road of discovery that they went on and found themselves, that moment of clarity actually made them into what they are today. And I can just hope that they see the guiding hand in it, in terms of what AFRTS was doing. People like Martin were doing, Salt, Marianne, because that we worked for that. We lived for that. We lived for the successes of rangers. So yeah, I love that moment of clarity. And I hope you saw it on the selections. Maybe that's something you can relate to me, is whether you saw it on selections.
Yeah, for sure. And I wish that 2018 selection we had more time, the one that we covered in RHINO Man. At the end of the film, we kind of give you relaying some reasons of why, some of them made it and some of them didn't. But what would have been great is to hear from them. And we just, because of timing and logistics, never had that chance really. So I'm glad that you kind of went into that a little bit more. But in 2020, when I watched a whole selection, but then I also got to see them go through training. So even more, you really got to see them kind of coming into their own and taking on that discipline and just feeling more empowered to lead and to work together as teams. And yeah, and I'm still in touch with a lot of those guys from that 2020 selection just because we were so close with them. And many of them are out there working right now and doing great things. So yeah, it's a really cool process. I just got to view it from the sidelines, but I can imagine actually running the training and getting that close with those students, what it must feel like to see them succeed. And even the ones, like you said, that don't make it, come back years later and say, yeah, maybe I was mad at the time, but you were right. I wasn't ready for that, or whatever it is. And I'm sure you've probably seen some come back to selection multiple times and then eventually get to a place where they were ready. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen guys come back for selection 5 times. I've seen guys that they would come on the first selection, drop out on day 2, second selection, drop out on day 3, third selection, make the entire selection process, but not have the attitude, aptitude, or approach required, not being selected, come on the 4th one and still have that bit of a arrogant root in them, and then come on the 5th one and say, I truly want to be a field ranger. What am I doing wrong? And then you say, well, you're not a team worker. We told you 2 selections ago you're not a team worker. You're going to do something, start caring more about the guy next to you. This is something interesting, which maybe I could just quickly step to it. This is what Martin and I shared. The students were more important, as I said in the past, or as I said in this discussion. The students were more important than we were, that's for sure. But the students had to realize that they were only as important as the guy next to them. We said to them, if you're looking after yourselves, you're actually looking after that guy. And I think they understood that concept, and that concept became this real character building concept. But I've seen guys come back from selections. One guy came on a selection, and unfortunately, it was an extremely hot part of the year, and he suffered from dehydration. We treated him for it and that, but he couldn't recover the next day. He was still completely weak. He recovered fully and everything else. And then he came back, and as I saw him, and Marianne's the one who always recognized them. She always called me and said, Doug, you check that guy. He was here before. And I would look at him and say, this is the guy that suffered from dehydration. So I would call him and say to him, why did you not drink your water on the previous selection? And he said, no, he had been to a Sangoma, and the Sangoma said to him, don't use anything, don't drink anything or eat anything they give you, because they give you stuff to make you weak. And I looked at him and I said, if I catch you not drinking water on this course, I tell you something, I will drag you to the vehicle myself and take you home, because he had listened to someone else. So this time he drank water and he made it, and you would have seen on selection, we constantly were saying to people, drink your water, in Mozambique, it became one of those phrases, beber muito água, beber muito água, always drink your water, drink your water. And people think you're trying to force them to drink water just because you want to, but that little body is drying up. I've seen guys easily lose 3.5 kilos in that 6 days because they simply overexert their bodies such a way, and you tell them, whoa, calm down, drink water, eat what is put in front of you, and go for it, because we know it can get you through it. So yeah, many guys came back for selections many times. At least, I would say the people that returned to selections, at least 2 of them, in a lot of cases 3, in 1 or 2 isolated cases 5 selections, just wanting to be there. Yeah.
Some determination there.
But it's difficult to understand. An example. A sergeant asks a group of people on selection, okay, so now you are appointed as a field ranger, all right? And you are now a field ranger in the Kruger Park. And then comes a guy to you and he says to you, here's a bag. There's 100,000 rand in this bag. I will give you this entire bag of money if you give me 1 rhino horn. Okay, who will do it? Okay, this one guy gets up, puts his hand up, he says, I will do it. And everybody's shocked. Everybody's looking at this guy. The sergeant goes, that's it, you're off everything else. And then he turns around, he looks at the group, he says, not one of you here has got a job. Not one of you have seen 100,000 Rand in your life. Maybe I can picture it in my mind. Be honest with yourselves. How many of you really wanted to put your hand up? And they all sit there and they look at this guy knowing that if they admit to that, they're gonna get out of there. The way I looked at it, I said to this guy, okay, if you do take that 100,000, would you have gone to the section ranger and say, listen, I've been offered 100,000. If you give me a rhino horn and follow me, you'll be able to catch the guys who are offering it to me. And he said, of course, sir, but the sergeant never asked. So how do you weigh those issues? How do you look at them? And then also, do you fully understand selection if you've not been through it yourself? I've been through a couple of selections in my life, specifically military selections. I mean, we did 150 Ks on foot, 3 days, 50 Ks a day with serious pack, things like that, part of a selection. We did 2 weeks survival, running away from special forces soldiers. They catch you, they tie you up with wire, all kinds of stuff in the military. I did a equestrian selection. We did 300 kilometers on horseback in 3 days, 100 Ks a day. So we called it Operation Bumsaw. And man, was it aptly named. I'm sure there are people in America, cowboys in America, that do 100 Ks a day, no problem. But I mean, it was a tough selection. The fact is, selections put you under a certain amount of pressure. But if you can still be honest enough with yourself in that process and say, this is where I'm at, this is who I am, this is why I'm here, this is why I keep doing this, I think then one's got to recognize that soul and look into that soul and say, okay, but what else? What else is in your mind? Because I hear you. You were simply being honest. So obviously he was thrown off selection, came back on the next one. And I said to him, before you do your first run, I want you to approach the sergeants and corporals. Go and sit on your haunches there and explain to them your answer. Explain to them what your real mindset was. And he did that. And let me tell you something, he made it through selection. And let me tell you something, that guy exposed poacher syndicates around the park. So yeah, I think one's got to see value in what people give you during selection, even though they are under that immense pressure. I mean, I've had guys swear at me and call me all kinds of names and things like that. And I just smile at this guy and I say to him, I love your aggression, man. You're going to need it one day. I just love it because I know when that physical pressure is away, he's going to be a different person. He's going to come and apologize. He's going to come and say, sir, I don't know what I was doing. And I would look at him and say, well, you haven't slept in 6 days. You haven't slept longer than 2 hours. You've done 180 Ks on foot in those 6 days, most of it 20 kilos on your back. I think you were under pressure. And I think you wanted to exert yourself. And you did. And here you are. Now, toe the line. Keep your mind open like this. We can't have somebody with a tunnel vision. And they do. And they become brilliant rangers.
Talk a little bit more about that pressure that they face from these syndicates. Not only are there poachers out there that might shoot back at them, but there is a lot of this pressure to turn, to give information, to help out. And I mean, you kind of just talked about it there a bit, but I don't know if part of the selection process is trying to put people through enough pressure that like they really want to be really want to be a ranger to go through this process. So I guess in theory, hopefully they're less likely to be someone that would turn so easily. But I just go into some of those pressures and how that can affect rangers.
Unfortunately, John, the pressure that is exerted on them in a selection is very physical. It manifests as an emotional maturity or not. It manifests as a team worker or not. It manifests as a leader or not. So you do get to see the personality in that. What you cannot influence in that selection process is the conditions in which this person lives and the amount of money this person has got available to them to look after their families and things like that. The poaching syndicates have got access to millions and millions of rands. I'm talking millions of rands. One guy was caught with 5.2 million rand in a metal box in his garage. Wasn't even in his house, wasn't even in a gun safe, wasn't even protected, just there in his garage. And he could literally walk to that box and take out 100,000 rand. Now let's just get some perspective on 100,000 rand. A ranger earns at the entry level, a ranger earns about 5,500 rand. So that is about, what's that, 60,000, 75, let's say 80,000 rand a year. Somebody comes to him and in one go says to him, here's 100,000, 20,000 more than your annual salary. Just bring me a rhino one. You know, what pressure is that individual under in terms of his home condition? Does he have children? Does he have a wife? Does he have a mother or father he's looking after? Remember, culturally, people in Africa look after their own families. They look after their mother and father long after, you know, they are out of their homes. Their mother and father come and live with them, that type of thing. So what is the pressure these people are under? How do you fight that? How do you control that condition where somebody earns, let's say, 80,000 rand a year? The person comes to him and says to him, I'll give you enough money to buy yourself a 2018 BMW. No? Or these syndicates go so far as to phone human resources and pretend that they are from Lubners or wherever, some furniture store. They phone, they say, which of your rangers owes money at Lubners, as an example, or at this furniture store? And human resources buy into this process. They go like, no, so-and-so, so-and-so, and they give them telephones, addresses, and everything else. Now, the poaching syndicate phones this guy and they say to him, listen, we know you live at this house, this street, this place. We saw your family, your daughter going to school in the morning, your wife outside washing the clothes. We saw all of them. I'll tell you what, we will pay you, but if you don't do this, we'll kill them. What is the pressure? How do you deal with that situation? It's very, very difficult. And only those extremely ethical will eventually be able to shine in that situation. Only those extremely ethical will be able to say, you know what? If I do take this to my section ranger and I report it, maybe they will help me save my family. Maybe that's where I should start. And they go to the section ranger and they say, sir or ma'am, will you be able to look after my family? Because the poachers have identified them. They threaten me to kill them. They want me to do this. And then something can be worked out. But a lot of guys don't see that. A lot of guys think I won't get that kind of assistance because poachers have contacted me, not knowing that those poachers contacted them, not because they know them personally, but because they got their name and address from somebody else that knew that they were under financial pressure. I mean, there's one situation where a guy told me, these guys arrive, they put money, they say to this guy, how much do you owe to that furniture store? And he said 10,000 or 7,000 rand. Guy took out 10,000 rand without a blink. Put it on the table, he says, there's 10, keep the change, pay them off, just get it off your back. Now, do you want a car? The guy goes, yeah, I was thinking of a Toyota Sprinter. The guy goes, no, man, here's 200,000, you can get a 2018 BMW. Go for that, nicer, you know? You need somebody really strong to resist that kind of situation, especially in a country where you've got such high levels of unemployment, where if you lose your job, you don't get a job quickly again, number one. And in this case, if a ranger loses his job because of internal collusion or because of anything like that, he will never work as a ranger again, but he's been trained as a ranger. He's developed as a ranger. It's what he does, or she does. So number one, you've got all that poverty out there because people are not employed. Number two, you've got salaries that are so bad, you know, so bad that, I mean, this is something I've been fighting for many, many years. Years ago, one of the private reserves, no names, no pack rule, came to Martin and said, would you train our rangers? Martin and I discussed it, and I said to Martin, just find out what the conditions of the rangers were. These guys were paying those guys 300 rand a month and a bag of mealie meal. And Martin looked at me and he said, I will not train them. And I said, I will not train them. And we phoned this guy and we said, we will not train your people. And he said, why not? I said, because you pay them a pittance. You don't look after them, but you expect them to be a bulletproof jacket for the rhino. Forget about it. We won't do it. It took that guy 3 years to bring his people up to standard with what we believed at the time was a good pay for field range in the region of about 5,700, 6,000 rand a month. And he did that. And then we said, yes, now we'll train them. And we did. And they were very successful counter-poaching as they were last time I spoke to them. But those are the conditions that we need to look after to stop rangers from stepping across the dark side. Unfortunately, it seems the dark side has an unlimited amount of money, an unlimited amount of resources. And it's as if it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, you see on YouTube, you see these videos of the drug kingpins when they find their homes and these pallets of money, stacked billions of dollars. And you think to yourself, is this what the rhino poachers have got? Because honestly, that guy that gets up in the selection and says, I've never seen 100,000, I'll take it. Okay. How much is 100,000 Rand? I've never seen 100,000 Rand in one bundle, you know? That
Yeah, it's a
doesn't
lot
make
of
sense.
money.
Yeah. So you've got to speak to the ethic of the individual that you're talking to. And you've got to tell them you are protected. If you do get approached, play along, but come back and tell us. And when you tell us, we promise to do everything in our capability to look after you, and then do it. That's the most important thing. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people also don't understand that you need to play a little bit dirty sometimes when you're dealing with criminals because they're dirty. So you're going to have to get some dirt on you. People don't understand that, and that we can talk about for days. I don't even want to go there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like we're getting close to the end here, but a couple more questions. Maybe one, since we're on the topic, is when you're training rangers, is this part of the training, kind of talking about what they should do if approached? And then on the other side of that, how much are these reserve managers, wardens, head of security? I mean, I think a lot of it probably depends on the relationship between them and their rangers to where they can actually trust coming to them and giving this information, because there is always also the chance that some of them could be corrupt. I don't. Those are kind of two different questions, but I don't know if you could go into first the training one. Do you guys train, and then what those relationships with their higher ups would be like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think during training, first of all, is to make sure that people understand that they're a ranger, and you enforce that constantly. You tell them constantly, you're a ranger. You must have good values. You must have a real solid approach to life, to your job. Respect for the people, respect for the weapon, respect for the elephant, respect for the soil. You do a hammer on that quite a lot, and you constantly tell them you are going to be under pressure. You must make a choice, and that choice, if you choose the good side, you will be supported. If you choose, and to the point where we would say to them, if you are in a reserve where you cannot trust your reserve manager, call me. Call me. I'll deal with it. And I mean, we've got a lot of contacts. And if somebody, and it has happened, where people have called me and said, listen, this has happened, but I'm really uncomfortable taking this to my reserve manager. I would call somebody and say, listen, this and this is happening. I would go and launch an investigation into that. And I've had situations where one private guy particularly said to me, why don't you come in on Monday? Just do a bit of a walkabout, re-meet your students, talk to them, look at their conditions, everything else. Make no contact with anyone in particular. And directly after that, I will start an investigation. And people can blame you. I go like, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And it's worked. It's worked where they have uncovered those guys. So during training is that constant reinforcement of you're a ranger, you are special, you are different, you're a law enforcement officer. You must be a person who is completely clean of any corruption. You must be incorruptible. And you can be that as long as you are strong and you believe in the people that you're working for, in yourself, the people that you're working with, those kind of conditions. So it is something that we address in training. And I would say we address it throughout training. We use all of the trainable opportunities to get people to understand that. That's one. In terms of when people have to deal with corrupt managers or those types of issues, and this is happening unfortunately more and more, it is a real difficult situation, because who do they go to if not to their boss? Okay, so people would contact me, or they would contact other people in the area, other people they trust or come to trust, those types of issues. And they would say, listen, we believe our manager might be corrupt. And we say this because of this, 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 and this. It's not just something that you throw out there. And then that can get investigated, perhaps from a different angle. And it does happen. Okay. But for managers dealing with rangers, It is so important to have that very close relationship. And I can honestly say that in the Kruger Park, there are section rangers that have got extremely good relationships with their rangers and really look well after them. And those are normally the places where you'll find there's virtually no corruption. If you can have a sergeant arresting a regional ranger in the Kruger Park, you must understand there's only 4 regional rangers in the Kruger Park. And you could have a sergeant, and there's probably 40 sergeants, arresting a regional ranger for poaching. You've got somebody that you can trust for life. Somebody that you know will not be bent. That person needs to be not only looked after extremely well, but almost revered amongst his peers. And that person must be used to mentor his peers and explain to them what was his thought process when he decided to arrest the regional ranger. What was his thought process when he decided, I'm sure this man is crooked. I can't talk about it, but I'm going to prove it. What was his thought process once he started that? And how did he get to it? So we need those clean, honest, uncorruptible people to go and talk to others as mentors and say, it pays off. It pays off to be this. Remember, Sergeant Wilson Suela in the Kruger Park said it probably the best. If I eat my bread, I want to eat it with a clear conscience, not with the blood of rhinos sitting on it because I bought it with money that I paid with for a rhino. That's why I eat clean bread. And that guy, Lucky, up with Richard, you've probably met Sergeant Lucky.
I have, yeah.
Those guys, Lucky Mthembu and Wilson Suela, are people that need to be revered. They are heroes in this war against poaching. And they should be put up front. Rangers should see them, hear them, touch them, learn from them, because they've been able to cross that massive gap of what do I do if, and that is an important issue. That is an issue that one must carry and say, listen, this is why I'm here. I always said to rangers, if you start poaching, you might as well be a medical doctor and start killing your patient. Walk up to your patient, kill him. Because if you're a poacher, that's what you're doing. And it might not be the best example, but it is an example that has made impact on people when they realize, I want to go to a doctor I trust. And the same happens in conservation. I want to be a ranger that can be trusted. And there are many, many, many rangers that can be trusted. Unfortunately, there are many that have become crooked. By the time I left South African ranger training, I know of 12 of the rangers that I've trained that have become poachers. And it still breaks my heart. 12 out of thousands is not a big number, but it's still a number that should not have been there. And I can understand that they were under different pressures, different things happened. But still, they should have had that little bit of guts to step up and say, hey, this is happening, and it's not who I am. And they didn't.
Yeah. Could you kind of to finish up on Rangers, can you go into, and I think you talked about this a bit at the beginning, but what kind of support we need to give Rangers moving forward in the future? Maybe what, what's lacking, and what we can hope to change.
I think in a lot of places, what's lacking is that legal support. I think there are still rangers that do not have legal support, especially if they are in a hot zone, in an area where it's very likely that they will need legal support. I think that's one thing that they lack. I think another thing that rangers are lacking, and if you look at some of the international studies that are coming out, a lot of places rangers are still living in squalid conditions. They're not being looked after in terms of equipment, in terms of the conditions in which they are supposed to live. I read an article not too long ago, I can't remember who wrote it, but when you speak to Rowett, ask him about it. But there are rangers who don't even have boots, There are rangers who don't even have uniform. There are countries where rangers are not allowed to be armed, although they are facing extremely dangerous ex-soldiers because of wars that happen in that country. The firearms are there, but they're not allowed to have them. I think the kind of support we should be looking at for rangers is that when we make a donation towards a ranger or something, to make sure that that donation reaches the front line. because a lot of people donate to rangers, and it's not necessarily the guy on the front line that actually gets the benefit of that donation. So if you are looking at supporting a ranger, make sure that you look at an organization that truly supports rangers. Look at what you guys are doing. You go and pick people out of the community. You develop them. You watch over them as they get deployed. You watch over them as they go into the workspace. That is the kind of, I can't think of the word now, that is the kind of involvement. That's the kind of involvement that you want to have with rangers. You don't want to say, I'm going to give $100 to this ranger corps, but you've got no idea where that $100 is going. That was a frustration for a lot of the time for myself, Martin and Marianne, is when we said to people, could you donate equipment, for instance, overalls for selection? And the guys would say, no, you're a for-profit organization, you're just going to take them. And I would say to them, I'll put them into the Kruger National Park safes. They'll be there only for Kruger National Park. Your name can be on it there. No, you're a for-profit organization. That kind of short-sightedness where people did not see the good that you're trying to do. Okay, don't blame them for it. But then they go and they donate to people where 60 to 80% of the donation goes to the administration of the organization instead of to the rangers. And that is a big mistake that I think is happening in these days, where you get this banner animal, the rhino, save the rhino, save the rhino. And everybody, I want to save the rhino because people are good in their hearts, they're good. But they must do their homework and donate to people that will actually influence rangers. Make sure that that's what you do. I can understand if an organization takes 15% for admin or whatever, but the rest of that money must end up in the ranger's equipment. You must be able to see it. You must be able to understand that his welfare is being looked after. So in general, I would say rangers need to be looked after in terms of their welfare, how they live, how they work, how they are equipped to work, and how they are trained to work. And equipping and training them is almost the same thing, because when you train them, you're equipping them with skill. So I think that's the type of thing that rangers need, yes.
You talked about this a little bit too, just on the pay side. How can we, I don't know if it's more like convincing governments or reserves, or I'm sure it's different everywhere, but to compensate these rangers in a way that makes sense, because even though some places in South Africa are paying decent wage relative to some other jobs, I mean, these men and women are doing a pretty intense and life-threatening job that's protecting assets that are worth, an uncountable amount of money to the government and people that are benefiting from them. So how do we go about making that change? I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
I think that is a change that must be made at governmental level, to be quite honest. We can influence private reserves to pay their rangers properly, and we have. We have spoken to private guys and said to them, listen, we've got such a nice system, we've got such a good setup. Let's train your rangers, but pay them properly, as some of the example, one example that I've given you. You can influence private guys to do that, and private guys normally, the better they do, the more likely they are to say, okay, we will certainly start to look after these rangers. It has changed a lot. In the past, people just saw rangers as men and women walk around the bush. I had one guy who described them as glorified farm workers. Needless to say, I was nearly up on assault charges afterwards. But I mean, that's just because that guy's got no idea what he's fucking talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, if you're going to change that system in a country, you need to approach the government of that country and say to them, how important do we see conservation to be? How important do we see these rangers to be? Because there's always a hierarchy and there's always a system and things like that. What is extremely unfair for me is that you get these people at the top level, chief executive officers and those guys, that are getting paid literally millions. And a ranger is earning tens of thousands, not even hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. And you get this guy who sits up there earning millions. That really, really gets me. Because what is that guy doing? What he's promulgating a place, a space in nature, which is being protected by those men and women on the ground. They should be the one getting the pay. I'll never forget the first time that there was an industrial action in the Kruger Park. Guys wanted to go on strike. And I spoke to some of the guys that are very, very good friends of mine. And obviously, there's a lot of pressure in terms of they should be part of the strike or their houses get burned down, they get intimidated, and all kind of stuff. And I said to them, carry this message to the Rangers. They all know me. Carry this message. You're going to jump up and down for a week or whatever. You're going to jump up and down and shout and scream and toy and go on. You're going to get a 7% increase. It's going to happen. Your 7% is going to put you into a new tax bracket. You're going to get less cash in your pocket. The 7% for your boss there at the top is 140, 180,000 rand. Watch. No, it will never happen. And it happened. And let me tell you something, it calmed a lot of people into a condition where they said, this industrial action, that's just a load of bullshit. We're not going to subscribe to that again. Not for that guy to get more money. But you can see that it is something that you're going to have to take on at a governmental level. And I've been fortunate enough to have spoken to governments and ministers in government, not only about the condition of pay, but in certain governments, the condition of equipment. I would go to them and say to them, you've got, out of 13, 7 of your reserves are on international boundaries. You've got a perfect force multiplier there. Let them get military equipment, backpacks, radios, weapons, ammunition, so on and so forth, so that they can help your army. The guys went, whoa, we never thought of that. And they did it. And that kind of support alone boosted those rangers to such an extent that they became really professional at what they were doing. And then you open that door of saying to them, now, can we pay them a bit more? You know, I was shocked. I'll give you one example, maybe no name, no packrel. But I trained a group of trainers in a particular country, and I suggested that they get paid $10 a day for every day that they were training in the year to kind of like, you know, get them to train. And the paymaster looked at me and he said, to be quite honest with you, if they trained for 30 days of the year, their annual salary will be bigger than the executive director's salary.
Jeez.
So can you imagine? That's shocking. So $300 extra in their pocket would make their annual salaries more than the executive director's salary. Governments must regard conservation bodies in their country. They must regard them and look at them and say, these bodies are going to keep our heritage alive. They're going to keep our soul, our cultures, our national heritage lies within their hands. We need to support them. And we really need to get that. Or we must highly specialize the job of a ranger, get him into a completely different bracket, have an environmental monitor that is a solid professional environmental monitor and gets paid as a professional, and have a ranger as a professional. And that's something we've been fighting for years, the professionalization of rangers. Because in a lot of countries, I'll give you an example. In Ghana, we stopped at a roadblock, and I asked a policeman. He looked at the vehicle, and he looked at the little black and white badge on it, had a little elephant on it. And he said, what organization is this? I looked at him, I said, it's your national parks. It's the Wildlife Division of Ghana. He didn't even know. How is that possible that one government organization couldn't know about another government organization? Because people were not regarding, and they're not regarding rangers. There's a lot of places where that is changing. There's a lot of places where people are starting to see the value of indigenous people becoming rangers. If you look at the South Americas, as an example. I mean, indigenous rangers are doing fantastic work there on the ground. They're literally putting their lives on the line, pitting themselves against nature and man to be able to protect what is there. And yet governments look at this and they go like, "What? Why are you looking for more money for rangers? I mean, what do they need? They work in the places where people go to holiday. You know, there's such a lot of misconception around that. But I think if you want to change that, you're going to have to change that at government level.
I guess to wrap up, do you have any final thoughts around rangers that you want to leave us with?
John, people must realize that when they go on a holiday to a game reserve, there are rangers there that are literally leaving their families for long periods of time, that live out there in the middle of nowhere with no amenities, nothing like that. looking after that area like it is their own, loving their community, like like saying to them, come on, be part of this protection process. There are people out there that have dedicated their entire lives to doing just that, to being out there protecting these places. Rangers are, in any country that you go to, invaluable. They are people that often find themselves on the fringe of society because there is this, people think that natural resources are there forever and ever, and it's not. Rangers are the only ones that can make sure that those natural resources remain there for all time and become sustainable even in this broken world of ours. If you don't have a ranger out in the field, you don't have a conservation effort. If you don't look after that ranger, you endanger that very conservation effort that you want to achieve. You endanger that by not looking after the person that you say must cherish it, must look after it, must protect it. So regard rangers. Think of rangers. If you're a tourist listening to this podcast, think of the fact that in a conservation area, there are rangers, men and women, dedicating their entire life to living out there. Pitted against the elements. If it rains, they wet. If it's cold, they shiver. If it's hot, they sweat. Snake comes, they might get bitten. Elephant might trample them. Lion might eat them. Poacher might shoot them. But they're there. And they're there for us, for you, for me, every single person that wants to enjoy what is around them in nature. That's what the rangers are there for. They truly are the frontline of conservation in any country, however you paint. That's how I feel. And I want to thank you, John, for RHINO Man, for putting rangers up front, for taking somebody like Martin Mthembu, who deserves it, and showing the people, here's a person that has lived, breathed conservation all his life. This man that has dedicated his life to that entire purpose. And yeah, I just think we need to put rangers up front. And this is what you're doing, and I thank you for it.
Thank you, Ruben. Yeah, and thank you for all of the time you've taken to help us on this project over the years, whether it was video, podcasts, conversations. It's been, an honor to get to know you and work on this and support the Rangers and the efforts that they're doing. So thank you so much again for the time and today. And we went pretty long, but so much valuable information and great stories. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. In regards to everybody there, and I know that movie's going to look brilliant because you guys have worked on it. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can't wait to sit down with you and watch it on a big screen. All right. Take care, Ruben.
Take care. You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the RHINO Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at RHINO Man the Movie. More details about RHINO Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for RHINO Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the RHINO Man podcast.